Hi, I'm Momo from Bonobo Flow, and today we're going to go over how to maintain your fire prop. A little bit of care can drastically improve the lifespan of your wicks, so let's get into it. Most Kevlar wick is a para-aramid that is a generic brand, but we still refer to it as Kevlar. Kevlar comes in a fiberglass blend or unblended pure Kevlar. For the longest time, the fiberglass blend was the most popular, especially in the US because of availability. There weren't a lot of issues with it overall, but fiberglass in and of itself is a toxic material if you're touching it with your hands or if any fibers become airborne and you were to inhale them. This wasn't a huge concern for the longest time, but now that pure Kevlar is a lot more available, I highly recommend using only pure Kevlar, especially for fire eating torches because that's coming into contact with your mouth. If you're on Etsy, you might see some fire props that are made with ceramic, which is a white wick. These are a lot cheaper, but I definitely recommend sticking to Kevlar. Ceramic is a lot more fragile and it can fall apart a little bit more easily, and those fibers become airborne, and this is a really bad thing for us to inhale. To recap, let's just stick to pure Kevlar when possible, and if you don't have that option, even a blended Kevlar will do fine. So the next thing we're going to talk about is fueling. We want to do a quick dip or pour over to evenly saturate the whole wick. Any dry spots on your wick can lead to the actual material burning instead of the fuel or fuel vapor, and then oversaturation of the wick will also lead to fuel spilling onto the floor, which is not ideal, and then longer burns, which can cause the prop to burn so long that, again, we're burning the wick instead of the fuel or the fumes. And so I will link the fire safety video and article in the description so you can go into a lot more detail on how to properly fuel and put out your props. When we're fueling our props, we also want to make sure that we're not getting fuel on any other part of the prop, such as your grip, any ropes or tethers or leashes. It should only go onto the wick. There are two exceptions to the evenly saturating our wick rule. Number one is if you have a Lyco sword, I would not recommend fueling the top inch or so of the wick. This is so we can prevent any clumping of the Lyco powder coming out. Kevlar is an absorbent material, so even if we fuel up to the top inch of the prop, because we're going to be fueling it in a horizontal position most of the time or even vertical, the fuel will distribute along the rest of the wick, and this is mostly a precaution to avoid clumping. For fire swords in general, or any props that have the wick coming very close to where your hand is going to go, I would also recommend not fueling the bottom 2 or 3 inches. Again, Kevlar is absorbent, so some fuel is still going to get there, but that will keep your hand a lot more safe. The second exception is static fire poi that have static Kevlar leashes. Kevlar is less heat resistant compared to Technora, so a lot of experts will agree that we shouldn't fuel the top inch or so of the fire poi that's closest to the tether to help protect the leash. I don't always find this necessary, but it's a good rule of thumb to keep your leashes extra safe. One of the biggest ways to shorten the lifespan of your prop is to let it burn out until it completely goes out on its own. We want to put out our fire props with our fire safety blanket before it goes out naturally. The longer your fire prop stays lit, the more likely it is that your wick is starting to catch on fire instead of the actual fuel and the fumes. So we just want to be a little bit cautious about letting our props burn until they go out on their own. Some larger props might be a lot more difficult to put out while they're still burning, and so we should just expect these to have a shorter lifespan compared to a pair of poi or something that's easy to wrap in a blanket and put out pretty quickly. When you go to store your props, make sure they've completely cooled down before you handle them. Any metals and tethers or even the Kevlar can be hot to the touch right after you burn. Before you put them away in a bag or store them, you're going to want to let them air out and make sure any of the fuel vapors and fumes have completely evaporated. This is especially important for rope props such as poi and rope dart because the tethers can absorb the fumes from the fuel if you stuff them into a bag too quickly, and they can absorb into the leashes and tethers. That's how I've gotten the most burn from a pair of poi that was left in a bag and the vapors caused the leashes to catch on fire. Once you store your props, you want to make sure you put them in a cool, dry place outside of direct sunlight. The UV rays from the sun can deteriorate your wick and your grips and even the leashes and tethers on your props a lot more quickly. We want to regularly inspect our fire props for any fraying. The easiest way to get rid of frays is to take the frayed threads and cut them off with some sharp scissors. I'm using Kevlar scissors. If something is coming off in almost a flap, you can take some Kevlar thread with some heavy duty sewing needles to sew it back into place. Make sure it's Kevlar though, because most other materials are gonna burn off as you fire spin. If your prop is severely damaged, I would reach out to the original manufacturer and ask them what you should do about it. But for any minor fraying, we can just cut them off ourselves. Cleaning your wicks is usually not necessary, but when you're traveling on a plane, you might need to clean them up and make sure they're good to go before you stuff them into your checked luggage. My favorite way to do this is with isopropyl or rubbing alcohol. I like to use the 70% because it's safe on fire props, but I also use it on LED props because it's relatively safe to even use on an LED unit. I would get a damp rag with rubbing alcohol to clean off any soot on the wick, on the spokes, or on the leashes and tethers of your prop. And you can put some wick covers on there as well, or plastic wrap them before you put them in your bag. We also have a resource for how to travel with your flow props, which I'll link in the description. To avoid excessive damage to your prop, try not to drag them on concrete. I like to practice on grass or any soft ground such as carpet. If you're practicing inside, I'd highly recommend getting some wick covers so that the covers themselves take the most damage instead of your actual wicks. If your props get wet or submerged, which you should totally avoid, but accidents do happen, I would recommend air drying them in a cool, well-ventilated area outside of direct sunlight. Again, we don't want any of those UV rays. Make sure it's fully dried, and then I would do a burn to make sure any of the leftover water inside the wick is fully evaporated. This will help ensure that no mold or any unwanted bacteria is growing. Whenever possible, you want to use a practice prop because you're going to drop your tool a lot when you're first learning, and that way we can protect our fire or LED props from unnecessary damage. And one of our last notes is if you have a knotted wick fire prop like a monkey fist, don't tug on anything or play with it excessively. They're obviously built to withstand regular use and they're generally secured, but all knots can be undone if you're tugging at them too hard. A quick summary: use quality Kevlar wicks. Fuel evenly, but don't overfuel. Don't overburn, and make sure you put the prop out before it naturally goes out. You want to cool and dry before storing. Inspect regularly and clean only when necessary. Avoid unnecessary abrasion and use separate practice props to save your fire tools. If you found this video useful, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and follow us for more Flow Toy content. Thank you so much.